Welcome to CSA's webinar series, CSA Cloud Bytes. Today's webinar, sponsored by Scytale, is titled Continuous Auditing and Certification, the Future of Security Compliance for SaaS. A few housekeeping items before we start. Please enter your questions at any time during the presentation by using the questions tab at the bottom of your screen. We have reserved time towards the end of this webcast to address your questions. Additionally, the slides from this webinar are not provided. However, check out the attachments tab for more resources. You can also access this recording at any time. Just use the same link to view the webinar again or share it with a colleague.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar of Continuous Auditing and Certification, the Future of Security Compliance for SaaS. With us today we will be hosting Mikael Yayon. He's a partner at the Technology Risk at EY, and Raz Kotler from the Innovation and Cyber Threats Leader at PayPal. The agenda for today will be to discuss mainly about security and compliance, the traditional audit process versus the modern audit process, why automating audit-related tasks, how to scale your security audit, whether you're a startup or a corporation, auditor perspective, IT auditor perspective, and future developments in that space, and new innovative approach of security compliance. And we'll discuss the question, should companies outsource security compliance? So this is the agenda for today. So as you can see over here, this is, I'm speaking Meiran Galis on the left side. I'm the CEO of Scytale. And again, with us, you can see Mikael Yayon from EY and Raz Kotler from PayPal. First, we're gonna, why do companies need security compliance? First of all, it's mainly comes from customer requirements, laws requirements, regulations. This is the main drive behind security and compliance. It's very depends which framework, certification, attestation, or regulation your companies actually need to follow. But actually, it's also driven by customer demands and requirements in order for signing on deals and contracting together. We can see this today increasing over time. And this is a thing that's very important in order to build trust through compliance and actually start working together. So as you can see, this is a requirement, and also all the privacy regulation like the GDPR, CCPA, the new CCPR, and etc. So we're going to discuss more in that field in the next few minutes. Second, it's regarding the security standards. It's actually going to increase the level of security within companies. And today, in a global world, working remotely, emerging of cyber threats, security standards, that's a great framework and program that companies actually need to follow and implement within the company. Third, it's built a competitive advantage. Everyone living in a space which we have a few competitors. If not, maybe you're a lucky one. But if you do have competitive advantage, so security and compliance can actually be a great differentiator. If you have compliance and your competitors do not, that means basically that you will pass the security requirement of your new customer faster than your competitors, and this is very important. So the main challenges in security compliance is first, inefficient. It's containing lots of manual work. It eats hundreds of employees' hours, literally hundreds. That means reviewing policies and procedures, creation of policies and procedures, evidence collections, security awareness training, implementation of controls, collection of evidence, including HR controls, risk assessment, software development, lifecycle security, logical and physical access, user access reviews, and etc. This is very overwhelming for companies. Second, inaccurate. Once a year audit with difficulty identifying the completeness of control. So actually, the first thing it's happened on a yearly basis and not on a daily or monthly basis. And second, how do you scope? How do you know which asset you should include within scope? How do you know that you don't miss in any of your assets? Because this is crucial as part of your planning for your audit program. And third, It's the complexity that required multiple stakeholders, system, platforms, on-prem, based on a cloud infrastructure, cloud native, identifying all, scoping all, assessing all, understand who's the owner, what's going to be the classification, and then implementation of control. It can be very technical, specific related controls, or more generic control. So the complexity and challenge are clear over here. And maybe we can zoom in and understand the main difference in difficulties and the pain points in compliance between startups and corporates. So while in startups, the time invested might be invested in the wrong place. That means that the chief technology officer, the vice president of research and development, and so project manager, DevOps manager, and etc. These are the stakeholders which will actually be leading the compliance within the company. Now, it's not that easy, considering the fact that they lack of knowledge and experience. They never did it before, and that may have some issues ahead. And this is something every company, every startup should consider if they're seeking to get successful results and not waste their precious time. Third, it's gonna increase the cost and bad results over your final auditor's opinion, or maybe if this is a certification, you can get some deviation within it. So you should, startup should consider this one. As of corporates, it might be very challenging to harness stakeholders. Multiple stakeholders, dozens, sometimes it can be 20 stakeholders, depending on the company size, and harnessing them to your task, and also getting top management support for this project might be very challenging. Second, corporate will and actually need to implement multiple frameworks, multiple products, and that's mean managing R&D teams on large scale, managing different infrastructure environment, multiple places, understand the data flow, understand which framework is relevant for them, and cut off all the redundant work and maybe bad result that you can actually, that you might end up achieving if you will go for multiple framework, and it's very difficult to organize all of them. Third, numerous peoples and applications. So this is something that actually increasing the difficulty and complexity over the compliance and management throughout the year, and retention of employees, and working globally. This is stuff that's actually going to increase the level of compliance within the company. Now, the most common frameworks today that you can see on the screen, starting with SOC 2 and Standard Service Organization Control, and ISO 27001, which I'm going to speak about those in a few minutes. You can see on the left side the HIPAA and ITRUST, which are very relevant for companies in the healthcare industry. And while the PCI DSS is relevant for credit card and payment processing, and CMMC, GDPR and CCPA. GDPR and CCPA are actually privacy regulation. So we can see on the screen also different stuff like attestation reports, certification, regulation, third-party certification, and etc. If we're gonna look further over the SOC 2 and the ISO 27001, which considered today as the gold standard for SaaS-based companies as of the compliance that they will need to implement within the company. So SOC 2, it's based on the American Institute for Certified Public Accountants. It stands for Service Organization Controls, and it looked backward. It's looked over a period of time. It's very relevant for the United States market, even though it's a global attestation report. It's based on methodology of trust, but verified. It's actually evolved from financial audits. And the period it's going to require for a company achieving SOC 2 is going to take between 6 to 12 months. It can take even more. And I'm speaking over here the SOC 2 Type 2 report, which cover the effectiveness of controls over a period of time. And comparing this to the ISO 27001, the main difference is this certification, and this is a certification, not an attestation report like in the SOC 2. it looks forward for continuous improvement within your information security management system, and it will explore the statement of applicability. It's very relevant for the European market, but actually it's a global certification. It's well known all over the world. It's gonna take for companies roughly between 4 to 8 months into a full implementation, but it's very dependent on the company size. If this is a very big corporate with 10,000 people, it might take even more time. The implementation, including gap analysis, the readiness assessment, and passing the audit successfully. So these are the main difference between the SOC 2 and the ISO 27001. But it's important to remember that these two are actually very relevant for every cloud-based platform, software as a service that have business activities in the American market or in the European market, actually all over the world, but we're gonna focus today on these two markets. So maybe this one looks familiar for those of you that already went through compliance, managing everything in Excel sheet, lots of email communication, collection of evidence, another Excel, another Google Doc, redundant, getting list of open items. Everyone know that. You know, this can be very, very difficult and complex. You will actually need to monitor and proactively managing that you are not missing anything in order to not cause for any delays forward achieving the compliance on time. So managing everything manually, this is something that can be very difficult. And we will be discussing more how you can improve this process. As of trends in compliance, today, the environment is changing following the COVID-19, and we see actually a different world from 2020. Remote work become a reality. We don't need an epidemic anymore in order to work from home or to work actually from anywhere in the world. Working anywhere in the world, the borderless world actually, this is something that you can see more and more companies today just hiring employees and contractors from all over the world. And in compliance, it might raise some difficulties because these employees actually not going to be part of the payroll list, but you do need them as part of your compliance compliance test and relevant controls regarding human resource and logical access and etc. And so this is a new development, and we can actually see more and more like sharing compliance posture with stakeholders, making management understanding what's going on. Actually, the SEC regulation, the SOX regulation, decided that board should be involved in understanding the cybersecurity posture of company, the main information security risks, and this should be part of the agenda of board and also management over the monitoring of the internal control. Cloud adoption, we can see both huge enterprises migrating from on-prem infrastructure all the way into hybrid cloud environment, utilizing AWS, GCP, Azure, and etc. And also small startup based on Amazon or any of the cloud service provider on full scale. Afterward, outsourcing compliance. This is something that we can also see and witness more and more. We have some lack of governance risk and compliance managers today, and in general, CISOs and information security specialists. This is actually causing a problem for many companies that looking for talented people experienced in this domain, but lagging behind finding the relevant employee for the company, actually taking the lead over the security and compliance and governance within the company. By doing that, outsourcing compliance might be a good idea. We're gonna speak about it more ahead. And multi-security framework. So company usually gonna start with some kind of security certification or attestation like the SOC 2 or ISO 27001. Also the implementation of some privacy regulation. It's based on your customer and the regulation that you need to comply, like the GDPR or the CCPA. And it's gonna raise more and more For example, Amazon Web Services today following 74 regulations, certification, attestations, and framework. So you should plan this ahead in order to build compliance on scale. And last but not least, it's emerging technologies. We can see new technologies that companies are utilizing. If in the past it was cloud and serverless technology, today we can see blockchain, AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning, autonomous vehicles, and more. So emerging technologies, this is a reality, and we should all consider this as part of the trends in compliance. So while today and in the past, but also today, we can see some traditional certification and attestation, which cover a 1-year period of time. By the way, this is for the Cloud Security Alliance continuous audit working group. So as you can see, the traditional certification, which actually happening once a year, we're gonna see shifting forward continuous certification. From 1 year, it's gonna be 1 month, 1 hour, 1 minute, maybe 1 second. Who knows? But this is something that become more and more reality. And today it's covering up, actually, if we focus in and zooming in on SOC 2 and ISO 27001, the technology infrastructure, the relevant technology tools that the company using, the organizational security, and in the future, we also going to see this forward the application itself. So this is something that you should take in mind. But as of today, understanding the continuous auditing becoming a reality. And this is something that you want to be aware. So today's discussion, we hosting Mikael, Yayon, and Raz Kotler as part of our panel. Hello, Mikael and Raz. How are you today?
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Good afternoon, guys. Raz, I would like to start with you. You in the past work in cybersecurity startups, in banks. Today you're working at PayPal. Maybe you can share and tell us about your experience doing security audits, such as SOC 2 for a startup. At the beginning and afterwards, how do you see the difference in big corporates?
Yeah, okay, great point. I will be very happy to share. I can say that in startup, and this is where I came to my CEO and said, hey, in order to enable the business, like first thing we need to do, we need to have the relevant certification. Let's check our markets. And when you are coming from a CISO perspective, and the first thing that you are saying is that let's enable the business, and not just as a phrase, in an action items that can be appealing to make more revenue in the future, it's make a difference, first of all, on the budget, it's make a difference on the effort, on the human element, and of course, the perception is making, it's different from a very gray certification that you look at. It's become more, sorry for my friends, become more sexy, yeah? To have like a SOC 2. Let's have SOC 2 to enable the business. So 2 things we need to focus on. So first of all, let's make sure that we're doing it for the right market. In our case, it was the US. In the US, you need SOC 2 as an external audit saying, hey, we are being very good with our security services that we are providing for the biggest banks in Israel, in the US, sorry. Second thing, and I can tell you from a personal perspective, it's actually improving the security posture of the company. Why? Because we're becoming one team, trying to focus on this SOC 2. And while we are not actually thinking about it, we are improving our controls. We are thinking about authentication. We are thinking about integrity, which for me was an amazing process, and I was keep on pushing it, and I will do it in my next startup for sure.
Amazing. Did it actually, speaking about your previous work at a cybersecurity startup, managing all of being the chief information security officer over there, did you feel that security and compliance actually helped the organization implementing right and correct procedure that supported the company in scaling up and working with larger enterprises?
So the answer is absolutely yes. When you are, and I've been like in 2 startups. So the major target when everybody's aiming is that let's create a business. Let's find a customer. Let's do a product market fit. But sometimes they forget about the procedures, the policies, things that are actually the basic fundamentals to run the business. And I see that ISO and SOC assist both companies to actually have a better procedure and structures in policies for sure. And it's also and you know, sometimes it's very nice to say, but I like it and I use it, is that compliance actually and this type of certification starting the way of security by design. Yeah, you have it written, you have to implement, and then it's from the basic fundamentals.
That's great, because you're actually speaking that you're taking security and compliance to be built in and not on top of some of the controls, because you're thinking them as part of the requirement and design phase, which is great. I'm going to ask you some more questions in that regard later, but I'm very curious understanding, how do you see, general speaking, because today you have some different role as part of the innovation and emerging threats leader within PayPal, but how do you see the difference between managing compliance in a startup versus a massive tech corporates like PayPal when it comes to security and compliance?
This is a fantastic question. And if you look at PayPal, we are available in more than 200 countries. And we have countries and regions, of course, and supporting 25 different currencies. And think now the multiple capability to have a compliance faced to the regulation, multiple types of regulations, multiple types of product line, diverse and complex infrastructure for auditing. It's a different story, but it just emphasizes the need to enable the business, because without having this robust program to have the compliance, PayPal will not be able to sell to these 200 countries. It actually enables the business. And this is the way I see it. In startups, it's for 1 or 2 product lines. In company like PayPal, is multiplied by 100 or even more.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a different scale. It's a total different scale, much more frameworks that you need to comply. Also, guess that the evidence collection and monitoring the compliance over here, it can be very challenging, but we're gonna touch this and speak about this ahead. Now, Mikael, I would like to thanks for being on this webinar. As a partner at EY and senior manager, executive director, you actually have been in the space of IT audits for a while so far. How do you see the development over audit attestation, including testing procedure and documentation, looks today and maybe five years ago, as you remember it, to how do you think it will look like 5 years from now?
Hey, well, I think it's important to remind that our first objective as auditors for security, what we're auditing is making sure that our clients have went through the right risk assessment process against their business requirements, their security requirements, on where they stand exactly, and from there they took the list of controls, right? So if you look at the audit sphere that we're on, that's what we're signing on at the end of the day, right? That we are not it comes it's being expressed within the reports by testing procedures, of course, but the absolute thing that we sign on is the fact that the companies made a proper risk assessment based on their business environment, security implications, and created the appropriate processes and controls internally, right? So so your question that you're asking is really related to how we make sure that we test those controls and make sure those processes occur appropriately, right? So 5 years ago and 5 years from now is going to be exactly the same. We're still going to be here to assess and review the appropriateness of how the risk assessment process was performed in order to define the internal control environment and processes. So now to your question, if you look, of course, back 5 years ago and 5 years from now or today, there have been a huge change in technology in the infrastructure stack, right? So all the cloud environments and all the technologies that have been used on, for coding, for DevOps, that are being used broad-wide for all SaaS companies, gives us and our clients, of course, the opportunity to structure and understand much more the data that we get from our client as evidence, right? So I would think that we need to understand our client technology to try to streamline it and get the appropriate evidence from that. We need to make sure that we leverage as the same way as our clients are leveraging the tech and the infrastructure to create much quicker solutions, much quicker applications. So we need to do the same. We need to try to do the same and to leverage this tech and this data that is structured, right? For example, I always take the example of the password settings, right? So each company has in its control environment password settings control. So instead of taking a screenshot, you can ask the API from one of the infra and get the data structured. So this is what I think we need to look at and make sure we enable that tech on our side and our client side to make the process more easy, okay? But ultimately, again, I come back to the beginning of the answer. We are still going to be assessing the risk assessment process and the business and the controls and processes that have been created around that assessment.
Thank you very much, Mikael. That actually makes sense, sure, for everyone in that space. And maybe I would like actually to zoom in and ask you, how do you see the technology is improving the IT audit landscape for auditors? Because in the past, and maybe still, it's a very manual and tough work to do, and lots of back and forth, really understanding what's going on into the compliance, into the architecture, into the organization and the backend. So does technology actually and will be improving the IT audit?
Yeah, definitely. It will be making the process easier, right? I mean, ultimately, again, we check the same controls that have been deemed relevant for the client or for the risk assessment and the environment. So the audit process itself would be much easier, right? By leveraging this data that we can get without our client taking screenshots or exporting everything. This can be really automated.
All right, great. Thank you, Mikael. Raz, back to you. As being in a large enterprise like PayPal, in a very sensitive, which holding very sensitive data and information like credit card and money at the end of the day. As let's say that I am a startup and I would like to work with PayPal. Would you demand any security certification like ISO 27001 or maybe attestation report like SOC 2 from your IT vendors, aka the startup that actually wants to work with PayPal?
So the answer is sure. You must have. Well, part of our third-party risk program, we have a questionnaire, which very famous for each supplier that wants to work with us. They have to present their capability to have a third-party auditing. And part of that, of course, SOC 2, if they want to provide us cloud services, SOC 2, type 2, it's like a minimum barrier to work with us. We have to review that. We need to understand the controls. We need to understand what's going on there in order to assess our risk, part of our program. So there is no question if you need to do it, yes, you have to do that.
And maybe this is only the starting point. This is kind of a requirement that startup will need to do. And following that, you might actually deep dive and really understand by yourself what's going on, right? Maybe this is something that you actually do. And if you do, maybe it leads me for my next question. Do you think that compliance equals security when people assessing emerging threats?
So the answer is yes, because when we are building the strategy for emerging threats, we're thinking about how that can be impact the business, meaning that we need to have a gap analysis, meaning that we need to understand what are controls, or how do we like to have our best roadmap in order to improve it. So absolutely, yes, it's equal to compliance. We identify, we predict, we quantify the emerging threats to PayPal enterprise in order to assist and provide a continuous visualization for the cyber risk program, which is actually, if you're gonna replace all of that and you put compliance, it's gonna do the same. So I think the answer is yes.
All right, great. I'm sure that's the starting point, because compliance is actually a great program. It's covering lots of different controls relevant for applications, network, organizational, and etc. and etc. But it's actually maybe the minimum required at least. And it's very dependent how companies actually approaching forward compliance. If they have like check the box mentality, or really want to understand the value out of it and leverage this in order to implement controls throughout the company. What innovation do you expect to see? Do you expect to see in this domain of security and compliance?
Okay, so one of the things that's already emerging innovation, yeah. So we already see it's coming at, and I want to say, like your company, but I don't want to be biased. But this is something. It's a need, yeah. It's a need to centralize all the data that need to be audit and evidence, and regardless, by the way, of SOC 2. As I mentioned before, we are regulating in 200 countries or regions and more. Some of that have inspections based on their government. Okay, for instance, in APAC or other countries, they have their own inspections to check our compliance and our controls. And the same data that we use for auditing for SOC 2, we're going to use the same one. So why not to centralize that? And this is where the innovation need to come into a place, and it's going to be easier for lots of teams, especially in a company with hundreds of people that actually dealing with compliance and regulations.
Oh wow, that's amazing. That's amazing, and I think it's very critical for companies to understand when this space is going and when it's developing. Maybe it's inevitable in a world that your data goes to your customer, and also to your vendors. So maybe it's inevitable, and we're gonna we just must see more developments ahead in order to just mapping, understanding the assets, classifying it, protecting it, and actually passing audits. Passing audits, this is important, but the main goal over here is to actually build trust through compliance in order to increase business throughout the world and pushing forward new technology and emerging technology. And Mikael, that leads me for my next question. Being an IT auditor at EY, you worked, assessed, audited, I understand, hundreds of companies throughout there, from very small companies like 2, 3, 4 employees to huge enterprise of thousands of employees all over the world. What trends and future development do you see in audits, and maybe particularly speaking over the SOC 2 reporting?
So I think that the trend for in the future, I mean, it's connected to your question before, right? So I think that we will try to focus more and more on the risk assessment process and understanding the appropriateness of that phase, right? Because we're going to get the data, like ultimately in, I don't know, X years from now, we can get the data all the time and we can make sure that password settings is implemented, et cetera, et cetera. What we need to see and to focus on is that where we can't put that automation and where you have this added value, which is understanding how this was done, how this was defined. So about the methodology, so big four companies are required to work based on a very detailed methodology that is common for everyone. And at the end of the day, I don't think that in the very short future, there will be a huge change on that. But I do think that there are going to be changes around assessing the risk management process of our company, of our clients. That I think that's the way it's going.
I see. And do you think that if today auditors based on population and random samples of some percentage of the total samples in order to check the effectiveness of controls, do you think maybe 5 years from now, 3 years from now, we're gonna see EY auditing all of the cases throughout the year and not just some random samples of events throughout the year?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure if the answer to this question is a yes or a no. I mean, maybe sometimes yes, and maybe sometimes no. I mean, again, it would depend on the risk assessment, on what has been defined as a critical procedure, critical control, what's also its frequency, and for each process, right? So if you have a process that has a very, I would say not a very low, but a low impact, a lower impact than other processes of control, then I guess that having a daily sample all the time of what's going on there that does not have the same impact of doing the same thing and taking data like real-time data for a very high risk control, for which in that case that would be significant, right? Because it's a high risk control. But again, since we're talking about operating effectiveness and looking backwards in the time, so we try to stick on the methodology, and I think again, always not forgetting to connect what we're actually checking in the control, right, to the big picture. What's the impact? How important this is? What's the frequency, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my point of view on that.
Great. It's maybe other word is just understanding the real risk and when coming and auditing companies, which that's actually make a lot of sense. So now I want to get back to Euros as part of actually wearing the hat, not as a innovation and cyber threats leader at PayPal, but being a CISO in a small like 100 people, maybe it's considered small startup, cybersecurity startup, very security aware. And managing all of the compliance of this one. So how do you have any tips for CISOs, GRC managers, maybe CTOs, managing this, facing multiple compliance? So, maybe we can focus one compliance like SOC 2 and managing this within the company while they have multiple stuff that they need to do. It's not only the SOC 2, they actually need to do SOC 2 plus development, plus architecture, plus fixing bugs. They maybe don't aware or don't really know what's gonna be and how the audit's gonna look like. And just managing everything, it might be overwhelmed. So do you have any tips for these fellows?
Yeah, I will try my best. Yeah, I can bring my own experience, and I think it's worked well. But yeah, a few tips. First of all, do planning. which type of certification do you like to do in advance? So don't be reactive, be proactive. If you plan for 2023 or 2022 to do one SOC and one ISO, first of all, put it on the roadmap. Second, start to ask and calculate how many working hours do you need for each project? Is it like 100, 150? Get this information from, from your either your colleagues, either from Big Four. Start to calculate in order to project what is the human effort you need to put on that. Second, make sure you have the list. I know that it changes from company to company, the number of controls that's going to be auditing if we are talking about SOC 2, but try to get the list. So it's going to give you a sense of what you are going to do. And then when you look at the list, look very thorough and say, what are the gaps that I can identify very quickly without someone coming to my company, very real with your understanding, and say where I want to focus. Do I need to focus on identity? Do I need to focus on confidentiality? Do I need to focus on SDLC? Where are my pain points as a company to improve my security? And when you get all these points together, I think you're going to be much more ready to accomplish it in a very efficient and very successful way. This is my
great tips, Raz. Great tips. I know that it's not been easy with passing a SOC 2 compliance in a first scaling startup, and I'm sure that there were some challenges, and I totally agree. Maybe managing some dry run or internal audit before the actual audit, going to eliminate or at least reduce some of the deviations that the auditor might find before the actual audit. Whilst thinking of it, audit should not be something that companies should prepare 1, 2, 3 months before the audit itself. You should actually manage in your controls throughout the year, understanding the real risk, understanding what's need to be done if this is a user access review. So you need to make user access review on time. You need to review, you need to approve, you need to remove these users from the relevant or critical systems. I actually know some companies that failed get a qualified auditor's opinion for their SOC 2 because not following a proper user access review controls. So that might be very, very problematic in companies. So thanks you very much, Raz, for this valuable information.
I want to add maybe one more thing, if I'm be excused. The thing with startup, the main focus is get to the holy grail, which is the product market fit, and then sell it and sell it. Nobody's going to tell you, hey, our holy grail is to have a SOC 2. And this is a big conflict. For that case, you have to put it on the calendar. You have to put it on the calendar to make it happen. If you're not going to put it on the calendar, you're just going to be facing the wall and you're going to be reactive and it's going to be tough.
Amazing, amazing. And would you recommend, while companies scaling fast, maybe they don't have time actually managing the SOC 2 because it's required experience, knowledge, some understanding, patience, understanding it's going to accumulate 200, maybe 300 of your hours. Would you recommend for companies beginning their way, maybe outsource compliance and focusing on their core responsibilities? Maybe that's going to help them moving forward faster?
My answer is depending the skills, the skill set that you have in your company. If you have some guy that know and did it already or very structured to know to do few stuffs, so don't outsource. But if you don't recognize this type of person that actually can manage that, do an outsource because you have to do that to enable the business. This is my perspective.
Great. Valuable insights, Raz. Thank you so much. Mikael, getting back to you, would you see, speaking about the IT auditors landscape, of course, we can see auditors, internal auditors within company, external auditor making private audits for customers, and third-party audits like the SOC 2 and ISO 27001. But understanding that technology is actually evolving, what do you think? Would we gonna see an increase or decrease in the needs for auditors in the future?
I do believe that we will going to see an increase of auditors because there's going to be more and more audits, and you ultimately always going to have that need of having someone, a third party, and not relying on all the time on system data, right? So I think that one, there's going to be more and more audits in every aspects of them. And so you will need to have people performing those audits. But I think you will need to have people understanding the technology much more and leveraging the technology to make that increase in auditing less a pain for our clients.
All right, great. So that's mean, in other words, that auditor will need to utilize technology, maybe being tech savvy. Maybe we're gonna see developers or at least people coming from that field. If I remember right, Mikael, you actually a Bachelor of Computer Science. So we can actually see that this space is changing right now, and actually auditors are much more tech savvy, really understanding the technology and the core infrastructure of companies. So that's really great, great insight. Maybe last question: do you have any tips for maybe startups or any company that will need to go for their compliance SOC 2 audit in the first time? What they should do or focus?
So again, I think they should take the regulation SOC 2 process as soon as possible in the company story, right? At the very beginning, to make sure that the right processes and right controls are being implemented at the very beginning. Even if it's a small company of 3, 4, 5 people, it's crucial. And I think it's important also to have management always implied in the process, and so that the management always pushes and gives the budget and appropriate personnel to perform that, right?
Yeah, exactly. It sounds really helpful for startups, and I really show that they're gonna take it seriously in understanding that, first understanding which compliance is relevant for your company, then understanding what is the next step. Should I find maybe a trusted partner to, maybe I should outsource it and work with someone closely because they got the knowledge, the experience, maybe the technology as well. And then do a proper readiness assessment and gap analysis. Understand what is the gaps between the current state to the desired state. Well, the desired state is actually the framework that you want to implement. So after identifying all the gaps, I guess you will need to build a control and start the remediation, implementation, fixing everything that doesn't work well. So I think in this regard, it's going to be very helpful for companies. And that's something that we just will see how it's going to evolve actually in the future. Maybe I would like to maybe share and discuss about future trends that we are already seeing in this space, and also developing rapidly in the space. So I'm gonna speak about it and show this and just ask our audience and see our audience if they have any kind of questions so far. So maybe starting with the speaking about the future of compliance as we see it. So continuous monitoring of controls and expected evidence, which you can consider them as monitoring activities. This is something that is actually already happening. Understanding what's going on with the controls, not once a year, maybe on a quarterly basis, maybe semi-annual basis, maybe daily. It really depends. If you can integrate and collect evidence automatically, that's going to give you two things. The first one, it will collect evidence automatically. That's going to save dozens, maybe hundreds of hours from your company time. Second, it will give you the ability to identify non-compliance issues in real time, alerted instantly, and actually reducing the level of risk of the company, also passing audit successfully. So this is critical, but the fact that companies can continue monitoring this is also based on the robotic process automation, which means building automation. If this is a manual module, if you can build automation using so dedicated RPA like UiPath or maybe some Python script, maybe Zapier, you can also use a dedicated tool for managing your compliance and security. That's going to save you lots of time. That's going to reduce the human errors that might be happening forward managing security and compliance within company, especially on a large scale. Agile audit management. We see already today, companies are changing fast, companies are required, they're working from multi-spaces, maybe from multi-countries, from more than 40. I know one company working from more than 40 countries. Everyone's working from home in this company. So it's creating some challenges. How do you deliver and collect some IT infrastructure? What is your clean desk policy? Do you even have a clean desk policy? If you have a contractor and he's working 80%, how do you manage the security of the contractor? Let's say that he's gonna sign on an NDA, but still, does he gonna implement your own agent for enforcing the organizational policy of fleet management and device management? Maybe he will be using some infrastructure, desktop infrastructure. So that's an interesting question. Also, advanced data and visualization. And the idea of advanced data visualization and advanced data analytics is actually getting you to see and understand the big picture. It's important that you will understand the big picture because you don't want to waste your time for routine, repetitive audit-related tasks and evidence collection. You want to spend your time or maybe invest your time for the strategic decision and maybe strategic program that you plan and you need to implement within the company. So that's gonna save you lots of time and give you the time to actually focus in over the real compliance challenges within the company. And last but not least is the artificial intelligence and the machine learning capabilities that we see, and we're gonna see more and more within compliance. We're gonna see this for the security questionnaires, we're gonna see this for the monitoring and maybe suggestion of quick implementation, and we're gonna see this on more and more. I'm also sure that we will see audit on blockchain and audit through blockchain. This is only something that's gonna come in the following years, and that's gonna be very interesting to see how it's gonna develop in this field. Maybe last but not least, why automating audit-related tasks? This is something that's gonna save you time and actually it's gonna make you pass audit successfully. It's gonna increase the agility of the audit, give you some data visualization and also data analytics, and you will be able to understand what's going on with your compliance. Compliance, this is not just a checklist. This is actually a program. And this program has a start date and some due date. And you're gonna pass and you're gonna go through an audit in the due date. So it's very important that you will do things correctly. And planning is crucial. As it was, I think, Abraham Lincoln that said, if I had 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. So planning, it's crucial, and also finding your trusted partner. I think this too is very important. Now, last part of this presentation, we're going to discuss about some Q&A, and I see one question that was sent to us. Does the fact you utilize automation, data analytics, and visualization help you understand the big picture? Any one of our panel, maybe Raz, do you think that it's gonna help you understanding what's going on within your compliance environment?
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the, let's say, pain points in any company. It doesn't matter if you're small or big. You want to have a visualization of your data and your assets and where they're located. So the answer is yes, for sure.
That's great. That's great. And Mikael, do you see any changing forward automation and all the and some automation within the space of security and compliance? And does it help auditors also increasing the level of the quality of the audit?
So for now, I see companies that are coming here that you know coming forward that provide this automated data, and yeah. So I think we need again to try to make ourselves to try to learn how to incorporate that into our thought process in assessing our client process and control environments around security. How can we rely on that? At which level? What would be our procedures? How dependent our clients are with those systems as well, what they do for that. But I do believe this is something that can provide some advantages for all the parties, right? So if everyone can leverage that. But again, I really want to emphasize the fact that we're talking about how we do the audit itself, right? Not about the purpose of that, you know, how you reach the risk assessment, how you do that, how you map how clients are mapping their requirements, their security requirements against their clients, et cetera, et cetera. This is the key part of it.
All right. Thank you very much, Mikael. It's very helpful. And I think it's also answering another question. How does automation of repetitive audit-related tasks will help our productivity? And if anyone would like to answer that.
Yes, I can. So first, I can say from a big company perspective and also a small one, when your team have one centralized location, when they can find, you know, the evidence, where they can find where the data is located, it's make it much more agile. First of all, to do the decision, and second of all, deliver them when needed to different types of auditors. So absolutely, it's something that can enhance and accelerate the capability when you have something like that.
All right, thank you very much, Fraz and Mikael. It was a pleasure hosting you as part of this webinar for continuous auditing and certification, the future of security compliance for SaaS. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mikael. Thank you very much, Fraz. It was a pleasure. Your insights are valuable. So again, thank you, and thank everyone that was watching the webinar. I hope you enjoyed and maybe it was informative to you. And see you next time. Good luck with your security compliance and successful audit.
Thank you, Meiran, Mikael, and Raz for presenting, and to Scytale for sponsoring today's webinar. We appreciate you taking the time to present today. Down below the presentation screen, you'll find a tab to rate the webinar. Please review today's webinar so we know what content you're enjoying. Right next to it, you'll find additional resources from today's webinar in the attachments section. If anyone has any additional questions, please contact us at events@cloudsecurityalliance.org, and we'll be sure to connect you with today's presenters. The recording of this webinar will be available within minutes of the conclusion. Simply use the same link to rewatch. Thank you for attending today's webinar and have a wonderful day.